Step into the roar of the crowd, the thunder of sandals on stone, and the heavy scent of dust and iron in the air. The Roman Colosseum, that colossal ring of arches and shadows, was more than an arena for sport. It was a theater of control, where power staged its cruelest spectacles. To the citizens of Rome, these shows promised glory and order. To those dragged through the tunnels beneath the sand, they were a lesson written in pain. From the moment it opened in 80 CE, the Colosseum was a symbol of imperial authority. With seating for more than 50,000 people, it invited the masses to witness the might of the empire. But behind the polished marble and cheering spectators lay a darker machinery. Cages, chains, and narrow cells where prisoners awaited their fate. Some were criminals, others rebels, and many were enslaved people caught in wars far from Italy. They were all reduced to instruments of entertainment, bodies through which the state proved its strength. The morning hours of a Roman games day were often reserved for executions. Condemned prisoners were brought into the arena, their crimes announced to the crowd. Punishments were not just about death but about display. Some were forced to reenact myths in which the actor was truly killed, such as being set alight as the hero Heracles or torn apart as the tragic Orpheus. For Rome, the punishment carried a lesson. Disobey, and your end will feed the appetite of thousands. Beneath the arena floor ran the hypogeum, a maze of chambers, lifts, and pulleys. Lions, leopards, and bears were kept in darkness, waiting to be released against captives. There were also holding cells for those marked for torment. Shackles and whipping posts were common tools, not only to restrain but to instill terror long before a prisoner met the sand. Roman law permitted severe measures on those deemed enemies of the state or guilty of capital crimes. Torture was not hidden away. It was part of the judicial process, a prelude to final judgment. Yet cruelty in Rome was never random. It was codified, wrapped in ritual. Executions in the arena were staged carefully, sometimes scripted with costumes and props. A condemned man might be dressed as a mythic villain, then attacked by wild beasts trained to strike on cue. Even the architecture contributed. Trapdoors opened suddenly, releasing predators or bringing platforms laden with fire or spikes. Every detail transformed punishment into theater, impressing upon the audience that imperial order depended on obedience, and that defiance would meet a public, humiliating end. Outside the Colosseum, Rome's prisons held their own shadows. The Mamertine prison, carved into the bedrock near the Forum, was notorious for its cramped stone chambers. Here, enemies of the state, including political rebels and foreign leaders, were held before execution. Ancient sources describe its lower cell, the Tullianum, as a damp cave with a hole in the ceiling for lowering prisoners. Some accounts speak of starvation, of strangulation by guards, or of captives left in fetters until their strength gave way. Torture in these spaces was a tool of interrogation as well as punishment. Roman law distinguished between citizens and non-citizens, granting some protection to those with status. Enslaved people, however, could be questioned under pain, their testimony admissible only if extracted by force. Whips, ropes, and weighted scourges were used to compel answers. The aim was not only to uncover truth but to remind the lowborn of their vulnerability. The Colosseum and the prisons of Rome shared a common logic. Pain was a language, and public suffering was a performance of authority. The empire thrived on order, and order, in the Roman mind, required spectacle. To parade power before the masses was to secure their loyalty and their fear. But not every victim was a hardened criminal. Many were captives from distant lands, brought to Rome as spoils of conquest. Gauls, Dacians, and Judeans filled the pens beneath the arena, awaiting their turn to face lions or gladiators. Some were executed simply to mark a festival or honor an emperor's victory. Their deaths, though stripped of dignity, were meant to advertise the reach of Roman arms. Spectators did not see themselves as complicit in cruelty. For them, these shows confirmed a world divided: the free and the enslaved, the powerful and the powerless. Children sat beside their parents, learning lessons of law and hierarchy. The applause that met a well-aimed blow or the release of a leopard was not only excitement but an affirmation of Rome's order. Even so, whispers of discomfort appear in history. Philosophers like Seneca reflected on the moral cost of watching pain for pleasure, noting how constant exposure to brutality could corrode compassion. Later Christian writers condemned the games outright, calling them a corruption of the soul. These voices were small against the tide of spectacle, but they planted seeds of doubt about a culture that celebrated torment as entertainment. The Colosseum's shadow stretched far beyond its stone ellipse. Smaller arenas and amphitheaters dotted the provinces, replicating Rome's formula of discipline and display. Provincial governors staged their own games, sometimes drawing from local prisons to supply bodies for execution. Roman citizens could expect leniency. Slaves and foreigners rarely did. The empire's vast network of roads ensured not only trade but the transport of those destined for arenas across Europe, North Africa, and the Middle East. Even the instruments of torment reflected Roman ingenuity. The flagrum, a whip with metal or bone tips, tore flesh with each strike. Iron collars locked around necks, etched with messages warning against escape. Stocks immobilized limbs, while branding irons left permanent marks of shame. These tools were not kept secret. They were symbols of state power, designed to break resistance and broadcast control. The Romans believed pain could reveal truth, cleanse dishonor, and deter rebellion. But it also revealed something about them. A civilization both brilliant and ruthless, capable of aqueducts and laws, yet unflinching in its readiness to use suffering as spectacle. As we stand in the ruins of the Colosseum today, its arches bathed in evening light, it is easy to imagine only gladiators and grand ceremonies. Harder, but essential, is to picture the men and women in chains beneath those stones, the cries swallowed by the crowd's roar. Their stories remind us that Rome's greatness came at a price, paid in silence by those whose agony secured the peace above. The violence staged in the Colosseum did not vanish when the crowds dispersed. It was echoed in Rome's hidden corners, interrogation rooms, prison cells, and military barracks where discipline was enforced with an iron hand. The same empire that built libraries and baths also honed methods to extract obedience through fear. Roman justice prized order above mercy. Magistrates held imperium, the power to command and punish. Trials could be formal, with written charges and witnesses, or swift, especially for slaves and foreigners. For those accused of treason or sacrilege, the process often included torment to confirm guilt or secure confessions. Wooden racks stretched bodies taut, cords tightened around limbs, scourges raised welts across backs. Every lash spoke the message that defiance, whether in word or deed, would not be tolerated. Inside prisons, torture blurred with routine punishment. Guards used chains, manacles, and heavy blocks attached to ankles. The air was thick with dampness and smoke from torches. Cells were rarely solitary. Prisoners huddled together, sharing straw bedding and whispered hopes. To break morale, captors sometimes imposed silence or darkness for days. Even when no blood was spilled, deprivation itself worked as a weapon. Beyond the capital, provincial officials wielded similar powers. In places like Carthage, Trier, or Antioch, courts sat in judgment under Roman law. Rebellious villagers, suspected bandits, or those who refused imperial cult rituals risked flogging or worse. Soldiers were not immune. A legionary who deserted or disobeyed could face fustuarium, a grim punishment where comrades beat the offender to death with clubs, a brutal ritual meant to preserve discipline through terror. Religious minorities sometimes felt Rome's harshest hand. Before Christianity gained imperial favor, its followers were occasionally imprisoned or put to death for defying edicts to honor Roman gods. Torture could precede these sentences, a way to pressure believers into renouncing faith. Iron hooks, racks, and heated plates appear in accounts, though later Christian texts may have heightened details to emphasize martyrdom. Still, the core truth remains. The state viewed obstinate conscience as a threat, one to be tested by pain. Yet even Rome's cruelty had limits, shaped by status and spectacle. Citizens of rank could appeal to Caesar or demand a cleaner death, such as beheading, instead of the arena or the cross. The Lex Julia and other laws offered procedural rights, at least on parchment. But those on society's margins rarely enjoyed such protections. For them, law was a wall, not a shield. The Colosseum itself evolved over centuries. By the late Empire, gladiatorial contests waned, replaced by hunts and displays. Still, the memory of bodies torn apart or burned alive endured, etched into stone and story. Beneath the arena's floor, archaeologists have found grooves and pits, evidence of elaborate stagecraft, and perhaps of the hidden chambers where the condemned prepared for their final ordeal. Why did Rome invest so much in organized torment? Part of the answer lies in its identity as a conquering power. Public violence dramatized conquest, teaching subjects to accept Roman rule. Another reason was entertainment. Pain, ritualized and framed, drew crowds. But there was also a philosophy behind the lash. The Stoic and legal traditions viewed punishment as a means to restore balance, to correct a wrong through suffering. Mercy existed, but it was rarely the first instinct of an empire built on discipline. Over time, voices questioning these practices grew louder. The jurist Ulpian warned against indiscriminate torture, noting its tendency to force false confessions. Christian bishops called arenas schools of cruelty. Even emperors occasionally curbed excesses, banning certain executions or limiting gladiatorial schools. The Roman state, however, never wholly abandoned its reliance on fear. By the 5th century, as the Western Empire faltered, many arenas fell silent. Some were repurposed as workshops or homes. Prisons, though, remained, evolving into the dungeons of medieval fortresses. Techniques once honed under the Caesars found new life in later centuries, transmitted through legal codes and inherited habits. Today, the Colosseum stands as a monument both to Rome's genius and its hardness. Tourists walk the terraces where senators once reclined, snapping photographs of arches that framed death as drama. Few descend far enough to feel the cold air of the hypogeum, where chains scraped stone and prisoners waited. There, the human cost of empire lingers in shadow. Remembering the victims of Roman cruelty does not erase Rome's achievements. Its roads, aqueducts, philosophy, and law, but it completes the picture. Empires are not only measured in monuments. They are also written in the quiet suffering of those who could not escape their grasp. The story of torture in the Colosseum and prisons is, at its heart, a story about power. How it is shown, how it is kept, and how easily it can forget the people beneath it. By revisiting these darker truths, we learn not just about the past but about the temptation, in every age, to turn pain into order and spectacle. As sunlight fades over the arches and shadows lengthen across the arena floor, we are left with a choice. We can look only at the grandeur, or we can also honor those who bore the weight of Rome's discipline, the nameless prisoners, rebels, slaves, and martyrs whose anguish made the empire's triumphs possible. Their memory urges us to tread carefully whenever justice risks becoming theater, and punishment becomes a show.